The little girl didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just looked up, tugged gently on the officer's sleeve, and whispered, "My dad isn't dead. He's under the floor." The room froze. It was supposed to be just another Monday morning at Brookhaven Family Court, a custody hearing, the kind that rarely makes headlines. Until that moment, Avery, 6 years old, small for her age, sat on the bench in a pale yellow dress. A worn-out teddy bear was tucked under her arm. Beside her, like a silent shadow, lay Rocky, a brown and black German Shepherd K, 9 dog in a vest marked "Service Do Not Pet." Rocky wasn't just there for show. He had been assigned through a local trauma support program for children dealing with grief and loss. Calm, intuitive, fiercely loyal, Rocky had been Avery's one constant in a world that stopped making sense 11 months ago. That was the last time anyone had seen her father. According to her mother, Jacob Matthews had walked out one night and never came back. No note, no goodbye, nothing but a police report and cold silence. The case had gone nowhere. No body, no evidence, no answers. Her mother claimed abandonment. "He left us," she told the judge. "I'm just trying to protect my daughter and move on." But Avery never accepted that. In the months since Jacob disappeared, she barely spoke except to Rocky. She'd talk to him at night, whisper to him in the car, and draw pictures of their house with strange dark shapes beneath the floorboards. Her grandparents worried. Teachers grew concerned. But every time someone asked her directly, she went quiet. Until today. As the judge closed the hearing, asking if there were any final remarks, Avery stood up. Not her attorney, not her mother, just Avery, soft-spoken, wide-eyed. She said, "He's under the floor. Mommy put boxes on top." Her mother's face twisted. "She doesn't know what she's saying." She snapped. "This is trauma." She's confused. The courtroom stirred, but no one acted. No one except Rocky. The big dog stood up suddenly, ears forward, body tense. He looked at Avery, then at her mother and growled. Low, deep, measured, not aggressive, but unmistakably alert. That growl changed everything. Officer Daniels, Rocky's handler and a veteran with over 15 years on the force, felt the shift instantly. He'd worked with Rocky for 3 years. That growl wasn't random. It meant something was wrong. After the hearing, Daniels couldn't let it go, protocol or not. Something about that little girl's whisper and Rocky's reaction haunted him. He submitted a formal concern report and requested a welfare visit to the Matthews residence, an unannounced check-in for safety reasons. That's when everything started unraveling. The next morning, with permission from the judge and a neighbor's spare key, Officer Daniels entered the modest suburban home. Avery wasn't there. She was staying with her paternal grandparents that week. The mother was reportedly at work. Rocky, the moment the door opened, walked straight in, no hesitation, and sat down in the center of the living room. He didn't sniff around. He didn't bark. He just sat and stared at the hardwood floor. Daniels watched in silence. Then came a single bark, short, firm, right above the area Avery had drawn in her pictures. He made the call. If you believe in the courage of dogs like Rocky and the silent bravery of children like Avery, make sure you subscribe to Heroes for Animals. These are the stories the world needs to hear. Daniels brought in a technician with a ground-penetrating radar unit. The data came back within an hour. Beneath the floor, an anomaly, roughly human-sized, roughly 6 feet long, dense enough to be solid, exactly where Avery said. Daniels printed the scan and drove straight to the courthouse. Same judge, same courtroom. She said her dad was under the floor, and the dog confirmed it, he said. The judge stared. The clock ticked. "Get your warrant," he said. That evening, uniformed officers and a forensics team arrived at the house. Yellow tape went up. Curious neighbors peeked from porches and windows. The media didn't know. Not yet. The floor came up, tile by tile, then plywood, then insulation, and then the tarp. It was thick, gray, wrapped tightly. The digging team paused. Daniel stepped forward. Rocky sat quietly just outside the room, eyes fixed on the opening. As they peeled back the plastic, the room filled with a thick, sour smell. Beneath it lay the decomposed remains of a man, still wearing a work badge from the local power company. Jacob Matthews. Autopsy would later confirm blunt force trauma to the skull. Time of death, approximately 11 months earlier. Cause, homicide. Rocky had been right. Avery had been right. And no one had believed her. The mother was arrested 3 hours later, attempting to board a Greyhound bus out of state under a fake name. She never confessed, never cried. But the evidence, blood traces beneath the floor, a missing hammer, and Avery's chilling drawings, was overwhelming. Later, Daniels would describe it like this: that dog didn't just sniff out a body. He gave that little girl her voice back. Officer Daniels had seen more than his share of darkness in 20 years with the Brookhaven Police Department. Drug busts, domestic abuse, cold cases that still visited him in his sleep. But nothing had pierced his gut the way this did. Finding a man buried under his own floor because no one believed a little girl, except a dog. After the discovery, forensic teams closed off the home. Crime scene tape wrapped around the tiny yard. Inside, the smell of earth and something older, sadder, hung in the air. Rocky, Daniels K., 9 partner, sat by the cruiser outside, his body still, ears forward, watching the front door as if waiting for Jacob Matthews to walk out. Daniels didn't say much on the drive to Avery's grandparents' home. He just kept glancing in the rearview mirror at Rocky. The dog, silent and steady, wasn't just a partner anymore. He was part of something far bigger now. Avery was in the living room when Daniels arrived. She was coloring on the carpet, pink crayon stick figures and black rectangles underneath them that looked too much like coffins. Rocky patted in and laid his head in her lap. She didn't flinch. She stroked his ears without looking up. Daniel sat down beside her. "We found him, sweetheart," he said quietly. "You were right." Avery looked at him with wide eyes. Then her voice came, quiet but certain. "I told you Mommy put boxes on top of him." Daniels nodded, not knowing what to say. He looked at her grandmother, who stood in the doorway, trembling. "I didn't believe her," she whispered. "God forgive me. I didn't believe my own granddaughter." Daniels didn't judge. Most adults wouldn't have. Word of the discovery spread like wildfire. News trucks lined up down Oak Ridge Lane. National networks picked up the story. Headlines blared across screens. K9 dog leads police to missing father after girls whisper. 6-year-old Saul's murder no one believed. Truth from under the floor, a child and her dog. But behind the spectacle was a painful truth. For 11 months, Avery had been speaking in drawings, whispers, and nightmares. And no one, no teacher, no therapist, no relative, had really heard her. Rocky had. The department launched a full-scale investigation. Daniels and the second detective, Miles Ortega, went back over every detail of the missing persons case. Jacob Matthews had been reported missing by his wife 49 hours after he was last seen by coworkers. No history of depression, no fights, no signs of fleeing, just vanished. The mother had claimed he walked out, but messages on his phone didn't support that. His last texts were to Avery, "I'll tuck you in after work." He never showed. Autopsy reports confirmed blunt force trauma twice to the head. No defensive wounds. It was quick. He hadn't seen it coming. Forensics found traces of blood in the subflooring. Impossible to detect with the naked eye. The hammer found in the garage matched the trauma pattern. There were faint traces of blood where the handle met the rubber grip. Not enough to convict on their own, but paired with the drawings Avery had made. Pictures of hammers, red marks, and black shapes beneath their house. It was damning. Daniel stared at one of her sketches, now sealed in an evidence bag. She had been telling the truth the whole time. The trial began within 4 months. It was swift. The mother pleaded not guilty, claimed Jacob had enemies, that maybe someone set her up, but the jury didn't buy it. Avery's video statement was played. In court, her voice was soft but clear. She described the night she heard a loud bang, how her mom told her not to come downstairs, how boxes suddenly appeared in the living room the next day. She had whispered into the floor for weeks. "I thought if I was quiet enough," she said on a recording, "Daddy would whisper back." The courtroom wept. Rocky sat beside Daniels during every session, alert, calm, watchful. When the guilty verdict was read, there was no celebration, just silence and justice. Avery, sitting beside her grandmother, leaned over to Rocky and said, "We found him." The dog nuzzled her hand. The judge delivered the sentence. Life without parole, no appeals, no more lies. But the story didn't end in that courtroom. The aftermath spread far beyond Brookhaven. Law enforcement agencies across the U.S. began reviewing unsolved family disappearances, particularly those involving young children. Seminars were held on how to better interpret nonverbal trauma signs in kids. Several counties began requiring K-9 units in welfare visits where child abuse was suspected. Rocky was featured on morning shows and news specials. The dog, I believe her, hero on four legs. But Daniels always turned the attention back where it belonged. "This was never about us," he told CNN. "This was about Avery, about finally listening to someone we all ignored." He and Rocky were invited to speak at schools, police academies, even trauma centers. Rocky received a commendation for extraordinary service beyond training. A bronze paw print plaque was hung at the precinct in his honor. Avery's grandparents, meanwhile, focused on helping her rebuild. They moved to a quieter town in Tennessee, enrolled her in art therapy, gave her a room painted in soft yellows with stars on the ceiling. She still had nightmares, but she also laughed more. Rocky visited often. On her 7th birthday, Daniels brought Rocky to surprise her. The moment the dog walked in, Avery lit up. "You found him," she whispered again. "You found my daddy." And Rocky, ever silent, ever loyal, rested his head in her lap, right where this all began. Children know more than we let them say. Sometimes they don't have the words, but they have crayons. They have whispers. They have nightmares and songs cut short. They have silence that screams. And sometimes, if they're lucky, they have a dog who listens when no one else does. Avery's voice was quiet, but Rocky barked the truth until the ground broke open. It was supposed to be over. The body had been found. Justice had been served. Avery was living with her grandparents in Tennessee, starting school again, drawing sunshine and stars instead of floorboards and shadows. Daniels figured he could finally close the Matthews file, fold it up in his memory, and leave it there. But something wouldn't let him. A month after the trial, he visited Avery's grandparents just to check in. Avery was on the floor, drawing again. Rocky sprawled beside her, now retired from active duty, but still very much her shadow. Daniel sat down on the carpet, pretending to glance over her shoulder casually. "What's that one?" he asked. Avery looked up, then down at the picture she just finished. Her house again, but this one was different. There were two figures beneath the floorboards. Daniels paused. "Who's that under there with your dad?" Avery didn't answer right away. Then she said something that turned Daniel's blood cold. "I don't know her name," but Rocky barked at that corner, too. Daniels froze. He remembered that moment clearly when they had entered the Matthews house with ground-penetrating radar. Rocky had lingered briefly in the far corner of the crawl space, sniffed, growled once, and moved on. They had focused on where the body was. No one had thought to check further, but maybe Rocky had. Daniels didn't say anything in front of Avery. But that night, he filed a quiet internal report. A gut feeling, maybe AK-9 alert with no follow-up, just in case. Weeks passed. Life moved on until a construction crew arrived at the now-empty Matthews home, set to renovate the property for resale. While clearing out debris from under the crawl space, they found an old storage chest buried deep, half covered in insulation. Inside were children's clothes, tiny shoes, a doll, storybooks, moldy and stained, a plastic bracelet with faded stars, everything soaked with mildew and blood. The foreman called the police immediately. Daniels was the first on the scene. He stared at the chest, then called for a full forensic team. Rocky was brought back, now technically off duty, but Daniels knew there was no replacement for his instincts. When they entered the house, Rocky walked straight to the far right corner of the crawl space, exactly where Avery's drawing had shown. This time, he didn't bark. He whimpered. Forensics uncovered what they hadn't before. Bone fragments buried just a few inches deeper. The remains of a small child, female, approximately 5 years old. Not Jacob. Someone else. The next 10 days passed in a blur. Forensic analysis estimated the girl's death had occurred 7 to 8 years earlier, long before Avery was born. She had no dental records on file. DNA didn't match anyone in the immediate database. Daniel started digging into old local reports. Two cold cases surfaced, one from 2013, one from 2017. Both involved missing girls under 6. Both were labeled as suspected runaways or non-custodial parent abductions. Both were eventually closed for lack of evidence. He went back to Avery. He didn't show her the pictures, but he brought the bracelet. Avery looked at it and shook her head. "That's not mine." Her grandmother leaned in. "You sure?" "Yes," Avery said. "But I saw it once. Mommy said it was from before, from the other little girl." Daniel's heart sank. He asked gently, "Did Mommy talk about her often?" Avery nodded slowly. "Only when she was angry. She said I was better, quieter." It was all Daniels needed. The DA reopened the Matthews case. A second indictment was filed, this time for suspected murder of an unknown child. The mother was already serving life, but this was different. This was confirmation that Jacob's murder wasn't an isolated crime. And more importantly, it meant they had failed to stop her the first time. Daniel stood at the press conference, Rocky sitting at his side like a sentinel. The sheriff addressed the cameras. "We thought the story had ended with one tragedy, but some stories go deeper. We are now investigating the possibility that the Matthews home was used to hide not one but multiple crimes. And we will not stop until every voice is heard." News coverage reignited. The headlines exploded again. Second victim found in murder house. Brookhaven K-9 leads police to new discovery. Could there be more? Daniels didn't care about the headlines. He cared about Avery. He visited again that weekend. She was quieter than usual, but calm. She had heard the news. Was she all alone down there? Avery asked softly. Daniels shook his head. "Not anymore." She nodded slowly and looked at Rocky. "He knew," she said. "He was trying to tell us." "Yes," Daniels replied. "He tried." With national attention back on the case, something powerful began to shift. Police departments across the country began re-examining cold cases involving dismissed testimony from children. Counselors and forensic interviewers updated their protocols. K-9 units were now routinely brought in for welfare visits involving possible abuse. Daniels helped launch a new program, Project Echo, a nationwide initiative to amplify the voices of vulnerable children and incorporate trauma-informed response into field investigations. Rocky became its emblem. His face appeared on posters and presentations at law enforcement conferences. A statue was even commissioned. Half dog, half silhouette child holding a drawing. Avery's drawings, once viewed as creepy or confusing, were now studied by psychologists for their unspoken truths. Daniels, who had worked narcotics, homicide, and vice, now spent his days talking to social workers, police recruits, and even elementary school teachers. "Kids don't always tell you straight," he would say. "They whisper, they draw, they sit in corners and stare at floors. But they're telling you something. And sometimes all it takes is one dog to listen." Years later, after Rocky passed peacefully into sleep, Daniels received a package in the mail. Inside was a frame. Avery had drawn one last picture. It was a simple house. Two figures stood in a sunlit yard, a dog lying between them. Underneath the ground, two soft, smiling faces drawn in crayon, surrounded by stars. Still hear them. Avery had written at the bottom, but now they're singing. Daniels put the picture on his wall, because some whispers never stop. They just wait for someone, anyone, to finally listen. The Matthews house stood empty for nearly a year after the second body was discovered. No one wanted to touch it. The neighborhood association filed multiple motions to have it demolished, citing trauma to the community. Parents didn't want their kids walking past it. Some said they heard sounds at night, soft creaks, low whines, like something buried was trying to speak. Daniels didn't believe in ghosts, but he believed in what pain left behind. The house was finally bulldozed in early spring. The land was cleared, reseeded, and fenced off as a temporary memorial. Local school children placed tiny rocks and flowers along the edges. One of them painted a wooden sign that simply read, "We hear you." Daniels was there the day the bulldozers came. He stood with Avery and her grandparents on the sidewalk, hand on Rocky's leash. Rocky had slowed down in recent months. Stiffer joints, less energy. But he stood straight that day, ears perked, gaze fixed on the house like he understood what was happening. As the walls collapsed, Avery whispered, "She's free now." No one asked who she meant. The impact of the case stretched far beyond Brookhaven. Project Echo grew from a pilot program to a national movement. Daniels found himself fielding calls from police departments across the country. They didn't want lectures. They wanted stories, real ones. He gave them the Matthews case, raw and unpolished. He talked about the red tape, the overlooked signs, the way adults rationalize what makes them uncomfortable. And he talked about Rocky, how a single bark in a courtroom shook loose a truth that had been buried for years. People listened. He told rookie officers, "Pay attention to silence. It's not empty. It's just quiet truth." At a conference in Dallas, a detective approached him afterward and said, "You know, before your case, we never took kids drawing seriously. Now we run everyone through forensic psychology. We reopened 3 cases in the last 6 months." Daniels nodded. "Good. That's 3 more chances to do it right." Avery was 8 now. Her hair was longer, and she'd started smiling more. She was still in therapy, still had nightmares some nights, but they were different now. Softer, less fear, more questions. She'd asked about the girl buried in the crawl space. She wanted to know if she had a name. They didn't have one yet. DNA analysis hadn't turned up a match, but Daniels hadn't stopped searching. He worked with a private lab to build out facial reconstructions based on the skull. They created digital portraits and released them across state lines, tagging known unsolved cases. Nothing confirmed, but 2 families had come forward, both hopeful, both heartbroken. He didn't want to give false hope, but he didn't want to give up either. And neither did Avery. She started writing letters, not to the press, not to investigators, but to the girl she called Star. "Dear Star," she wrote in one, "I think about you when I'm scared. I think about how you stayed quiet for so long. But Rocky heard you. I heard you, too. We remember you. We'll never forget." Daniels kept the letter. It reminded him why he stayed in this work, even after 2 decades and enough pain to last several lifetimes. Then came a break. A social worker in Alabama saw one of the digital portraits and contacted Brookhaven PD. She'd been working with a family in 2015, young parents struggling with substance abuse who had lost a daughter named Elsie. The case had gone cold when the parents moved and couldn't be located. The child's file was closed with no follow-up. The age, features, and approximate time frame matched. Daniels called Avery's grandmother before they made it public. He wanted Avery to hear it from someone she trusted. They sat on the porch that evening, the air warm and sticky with southern spring. Avery held Rocky's head in her lap, his breathing slow and even. "She has a name now," Daniel said softly. Avery looked up. Her eyes didn't widen like he expected. They just got very, very still. "What is it?" "Elsie," Daniel said. Avery repeated it under her breath. "Elsie." Then she smiled. "That's a pretty name." Daniel smiled, too. "It is." The body was returned to the biological family for burial. The town helped raise funds. Daniels didn't attend the funeral, but he watched the live stream from his desk. Rocky curled at his feet. The family had chosen to use one of the digital portraits for the memorial photo. Avery sent flowers. The note read, "You are not forgotten. You are not alone." Life didn't go back to normal, but it found something new, a rhythm. Daniels transitioned into a new role within the department. Half detective, half outreach coordinator, working specifically on trauma-informed investigations. He visited schools, trained SROs, and gave talks at hospitals about listening to kids, about the signs no one talks about, withdrawal, odd drawings, pets that act strangely when certain people enter a room. He used Avery's story, but only with her blessing. "Tell him the part about the boxes," she'd say. "People forget about the boxes." He always did. Rocky, now older, came along when he could. Kids loved him. They'd sit on the floor around him like story time in a library. Some would whisper secrets to him, just like Avery once had. Daniels never asked what they said. He just watched and listened. One afternoon, a little boy at a community center leaned in close to Rocky's ear and whispered, "My mom's boyfriend hurts me when she's not home." Rocky stood up, looked at Daniels. That was all it took. An investigation opened within 24 hours. The boy was relocated. His story, like Avery's, had finally been heard. Daniels sat in his car that night, hand on Rocky's head. "You're still doing the work," he said, "even now." Rocky blinked slowly, then leaned into his shoulder. Months later, Daniels knew it was time. Rocky wasn't moving like he used to. Stairs were hard. Mornings were stiff. The vet confirmed the inevitable. Arthritis, heart slowing, age catching up. He spent his last day lying under the shade tree in Avery's yard, surrounded by love. Avery brushed him, talked to him about the stars, read him one final letter. "Dear Rocky," she said, her voice trembling, "you were never just a dog. You were my listener, my hero, my best friend. You barked for the ones who couldn't speak, and you stayed until we were safe." Daniel sat beside her, hand on her shoulder. When Rocky passed, it was quiet, peaceful, just the way heroes should go. The town held a small ceremony. A plaque was placed in the center of the memorial garden. Rocky, he heard what others ignored. Underneath it read, "Because sometimes the bark of a dog carries the voice of a child." Daniels didn't speak at the event. He didn't have to. Avery stood instead. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She held the leash in her hand like a ribbon and said, "Rocky saved me. He saved Daddy. And he saved a girl we didn't even know. So now I'm going to save others, too. I'll be the voice." The crowd stood in silence. Some wiped their eyes. Others just stood with hands over their hearts. She walked down from the podium and placed a single star-shaped rock at the base of the plaque. And for a moment, in the stillness of that garden, the wind passed through the trees like a whisper, like a bark, like memory, still echoing, still heard. Spring rolled into summer, quietly that year, like the world had finally taken a breath. The memorial garden, where Rocky's plaque stood, was now full of color. Wildflowers, chalk drawings, folded paper cranes, and small hand-painted stones. Families stopped by on weekends. Some left letters. Some just stood in silence. The town had moved on, but not forgotten. Neither had Daniels. In the months after Rocky's passing, something shifted in him. He still wore the badge, still clocked in at the precinct every morning. But it wasn't the same. The Matthews case, the second body, the child named Elsie, it had all changed him. Not just as a cop, but as a man. He found himself slowing down, not out of fatigue, but purpose. When you've seen how easy it is to miss the truth, you learn to pay attention to the quiet things. One afternoon, Daniel sat on a bench across from the garden, flipping through one of Avery's old drawings. It was the one she had made right after her dad was found, the house with the dark shapes on the floor. He traced his finger over the crayon lines. "You got it right," he murmured, "before any of us did." A voice pulled him out his thoughts. "Detective Daniels?" He looked up. A woman, maybe in her early 30s, stood a few feet away, nervously clutching a manila envelope. Her name was Lauren Price, a social worker from a small town in Alabama. She had driven 4 hours just to speak with him in person. "I didn't want to email this," she said. She sat beside him and handed over the envelope. Inside were documents, mostly case summaries, some photos, a few hand-drawn pictures. "I've got a little boy named Mateo," she said. 5 years old. Foster care. Came in after his mom was hospitalized. He doesn't talk much, but he draws, and he points to the same corner of the house over and over. Says the dog barks there. Daniel stared at the photos. One drawing showed a figure curled in a box on the floor. Another showed a big brown dog with a paw on the wood. "He doesn't have a dog," she added. "Never did." Daniels didn't answer right away. He turned the drawing around slowly, let his eyes trace the lines. He didn't have Rocky anymore, but he had something else now, training, instincts, and Avery's voice in his head. "Don't forget the boxes." He stood up. "I'll come with you." The house was small, brick siding, cracked front step, toys in a yard that hadn't been touched in months. Mateo was staying with a foster family across town, so the property was empty. The social worker met them at the door, keys shaking in her hand. Daniel stepped inside. The air smelled stale. Something about it felt paused, like the house had been holding its breath, waiting for someone to listen. He walked the perimeter first, checked the closets, the walls. Then he came to the living room. One section of the floor near the back wall had slight discoloration. Water damage, maybe, but the boards didn't creak like the others. They were stiff. Daniels dropped to one knee. He didn't have Rocky to sniff it. Didn't have a cadaver dog at all. But he pressed his palm to the wood and listened. Nothing. He opened his phone and texted a contact at a nearby precinct, asked for ground-penetrating radar. While he waited, he called Avery. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Detective Dan," she said. Her voice was brighter now, confident, strong. "I've got a situation," he said. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." He described the house, the drawings, the dog that never existed. There was a pause. Then she said quietly, "The dog is a feeling." He blinked. "What do you mean?" "Sometimes when kids feel scared, their brain gives them protector. Mateo doesn't have Rocky, but maybe he feels him. Maybe he's remembering a bark that never came out loud." Daniel stared at the floor and the boxes. Did his mom stack boxes in that corner? He hadn't thought to ask. He checked the photo Lauren had provided. Sure enough, 2 cardboard boxes marked Christmas sat in that exact spot in an old case photo. Daniels whispered, "I'll let you know what we find." The radar came within the hour. Beneath the floor was a void, roughly 5 feet by 2, unnatural, hollow. The warrant came through by sundown. They opened the floor. Inside was a plastic-wrapped bundle. Human remains, small bones, a child, estimated time of death, 6 to 12 months ago. Daniel stepped out of the house and leaned against the cruiser. He didn't cry. He didn't collapse. He just looked up at the sky and said, "You're still working, partner." The discovery of the 3rd child sent another wave through the national conversation. People weren't asking if kids were trying to tell us the truth anymore. They were asking how many times they'd been ignored. Daniels was asked to testify at a federal roundtable on trauma-informed investigation. He brought Avery with him. She sat at the table, small but fearless. They asked her, "Why do you think people didn't listen to you?" She didn't blink. "Because I was small and my mom was loud." Daniels watched the room fall into silence. That kind of truth doesn't need volume, just space. After the hearing, Avery was offered a chance to write a children's book. She titled it Rocky and the Whisper. It became a quiet bestseller in trauma counseling circles. The dedication read, "To all the kids who see things adults don't." On the anniversary of Rocky's passing, Daniels and Avery returned to the Memorial Garden. It had grown since that first spring. Someone had added wind chimes. There were new rocks with new names, Elsie, Mateo, and more. Avery placed a new stone at the base of the plaque. It read, still listening. Daniel sat beside her. "You ever think about what comes next?" he asked. She nodded. "I want to help kids like me. Maybe be a counselor or maybe a detective." He smiled. "I think you'd be good at both." A breeze passed through the garden, and for just a second, Daniel swore he heard it. Faint, low, steady, a bark. Somewhere in the wind, still echoing, still heard. 3 years had passed since the day Rocky barked to the floor in a Georgia courtroom. 3 years, and the child's whisper shifted the course of an investigation and countless lives. The Matthews case was no longer just a local headline. It had become a national symbol of what it meant to truly listen, especially when the voices are small, soft, or hidden beneath fear. Officer Daniels had changed, too. He had officially retired from the force a year before. Not because he was done with justice, but because his mission had expanded beyond what the badge could hold. He now worked full-time with Project Echo, traveling coast to coast to teach law enforcement teachers and child advocates how to hear what isn't spoken. His partner Rocky had left this world with honor, but his presence remained etched in the stories they told, the protocols rewritten, and in every K-9 unit trained to go beyond scent, to sense silence, trauma, and the truth tucked inside both. Avery was now 10. She spoke at conferences. She'd started a small podcast with the help of her school counselor called Little Voices, Big Truths. Each episode featured a story, sometimes hers, sometimes from other kids, sometimes just a reflection on healing. Her voice, once timid, had grown with strength, not volume, just certainty. Sometimes, she said on an episode that aired the week of Rocky's memorial anniversary, you don't need people to speak louder. You just need the room to be quiet enough to hear them. The episode went viral. That summer, Daniels was invited to a national summit in Washington, D.C. on trauma-informed policing. He asked Avery to co-present. At first, she was hesitant. It's a big room, she said. You've handled bigger, he replied. She smiled. On stage, under bright lights and in front of hundreds of officers, therapists, and policymakers, Daniels opened with a photo of Rocky, his brown and black fur, proud canine vest, and wise eyes. Then he stepped aside, and Avery stepped forward. She took a deep breath and spoke. I'm here because someone finally listened. I'm here because a dog heard what no one else would. I'm here because my dad couldn't speak for himself, and someone had to. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. After presentation, a young officer approached Daniels. I'm about to start my K-9 training unit, he said. I always thought it was about drugs and suspects, but this is something else. Daniels smiled and clapped a hand on his shoulder. It's always been about more than that. You just have to train your heart, not just your dog. Meanwhile, in Brookhaven, the site where the Matthews house once stood had become something else entirely. Avery's grandparents, with the support of the town and a grant from a National Children's Foundation, had built a center, the Whisper House, a quiet space designed for kids in crisis, complete with therapy rooms, art stations, a sensory garden, and a room full of K9s in training. Above the door was a bronze plaque with Rocky's paw print and the words, "Silence is not absence. It's waiting to be heard." Children came from all over. Some had lost parents. Some had seen too much. Some hadn't spoken in weeks. But in that space, they were heard in drawings, in tears, in laughter, and sometimes in the gentle nudge of a dog's nose against their hand. Daniels visited often, not as an officer, just as Dan. He'd sit on the bench near the garden, watching the kids chase bubbles or read books to therapy dogs. He never made it about himself, but sometimes the older ones would sit beside him quietly. One day, a girl named Mila, barely 7, sat down beside him, holding a stuffed animal. Are you the one who had the dog that found the dad? He nodded. Was the girl scared? Yes, he said softly. But she was also brave. Mila looked down. I don't think I'm brave. Daniels reached into his pocket and pulled out a tiny wooden token. On it was the image of a paw, hand-carved. He gave it to her. Keep this, he said. Rocky gave it to me once. Said it belongs to anyone who keeps going even when they're scared. She didn't smile right away, but she held the token tight. That fall, Daniels was invited back to Avery's school. She was in 5th grade now, taller, more sure of herself. Her classmates were putting on a project called Voices Uncovered, a collection of monologues and short scenes based on real child advocacy stories. Avery had written one herself, and she asked Daniels to sit front row. The lights dimmed. A young girl walked on stage with a toy dog on a leash. She sat cross-legged beside it and began to speak. I used to whisper into floorboards. I thought if I was quiet enough, my dad would whisper back. But the dog heard me first. He barked for me, and someone finally listened. Daniels didn't cry easily, but that night he did. After the show, Avery walked up to him. Pretty good actor, huh? She's got competition, he said. She leaned in. Next year, I'm applying to the junior volunteer program at the Whisper House. Daniels grinned. They'd be lucky to have you. And they were. Avery's presence transformed the center. She became the bridge between kids and counselors, someone who knew what it meant to be doubted, overlooked, believed too young to know anything real. She wasn't a therapist. She was something better. A peer, an echo, a living answer to the question, what happens when we choose to listen? One night, Daniel sat on his back porch, the stars blinking quietly overhead. He sipped a cup of decaf and held a worn photo of Rocky in his lap. The wind was soft, the night calm. He thought about the whispers he'd ignored early in his career, the ones he'd dismissed as childish or confused. He thought about the officers who still brushed aside intuition in favor of paperwork. And then he thought about Avery, her drawings, her strength, her voice. He didn't need to hear her bark to know what Rocky would have said. Keep listening, partner. There's more to do. Daniel stood and walked inside. The work wasn't over. Not yet. To everyone who's followed Avery and Rocky's story from the very beginning, we want to say thank you. These weren't just chapters of a crime case. They were moments in real lives, moments that taught us all something valuable. That listening, truly listening, can change everything. So, we'll leave you with one question. How many whispers have you missed? And what might happen if you start listening now? Thank you for being with us. We're still listening. Are you?